Module of our workshop on alternative fuels and power solutions for shipping and ports. Yesterday already you heard about some pillars of the strategy that the EU has put in place to meet very ambitious objectives in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases and switching to greener sources of power for shipping. One of these pillars is the so-called FuelEU Maritime regulation. We are approaching a fundamental milestone, 1st January 2025. As EMSA, we are at the forefront at the side of the European Commission, the EU member states, competent authorities, and the industry to make sure that the implementation runs smoothly and effectively. One of our big tasks have been the development of the tools, the IT tools that support this implementation, but not only. And today this module will take stock of where we are, also in view of this very important deadline. And we will try also to raise awareness. Because 1st of January is here and is now. I will first give the floor to Peter Zaga, who is with us from far away, from Brussels. As I said, we have one shaping and steering institution in this journey that we have towards greener shipping, and this is the European Commission. And Peter is here in representation of DG Move. Peter, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. I hope you hear me well. So good morning to everybody, and thank you, Manuela, for the introduction and for organizing this very interesting workshop that is going on for 2 days. And thank you for you who are participating there in Lisbon. I apologize that I cannot be there with you, but I still hope that my presentation online will be also helpful and useful. So indeed, my name is Peter Zaga, and I work in DG Move, in the team that is responsible for the implementation of the FuelEU Maritime regulation. And indeed, we have been working very, very closely with our EMSA colleagues in Lisbon from the beginning, already on the design, on the Commission proposal, and then during the negotiating state, and now for preparing for the implementation of this important regulation. So we had a bit of a division of labor between us, between MOVE and EMSA, and the presentations that you will be hearing today are reflecting this division of labor. First, I will be talking more about the general political elements, the general approach and objective of this regulation, and then my EMSA colleagues will be more zooming down on more technical issues, what kind of actions need to be taken from operators, how the compliance work, so on a more practical presentation. I have some slide and I will share my screen now. I hope it will work well. Tell me if there's a problem, but on my screen it looks good. So first of all, I just taking one step back and want to put the FuelEU into a wider context. As you know, we have a basket of measures, the FuelEU and the ETS Maritime maybe being the two most important elements. As you know, these are two relatively different animals. While the FuelEU has a target, the ETS is more about putting a price on emissions, but the objective is the same, to reduce the emissions coming from vessels, from shipping. I think it's very important to remember that there's a lot of similarities in the FuelEU and the ETS Maritime in terms of the building blocks, but there are important differences as well. And we often get a lot of questions. Why is this and how is it in the ETS, how it is in the FuelEU? So we have to pay a lot of attention on these minor differences, but that look minor, but at the end they are quite relevant. These relate, for example, to the regulated entity. In the FuelEU, it's always the ISM company. In the ETS, there's a choice between ship owners and managers. Also, the way international voyages are calculated, or the treatment of different fuels. So we have to be mindful of these small but relevant differences. Also, we have to mention the AFIR, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, that is taking care of the infrastructure. I think it's quite a static regulation where we know the objectives, we know what ports need to be done. And then finally, there's the Renewable Energy Directive, which is creating the sustainability criteria and the certification framework for renewable fuels, both for the ETS and both for FuelEU. Now, here there's a constant changes, and we have to be very careful, very mindful that we are following the RED, how RED is changing, how RED is coming up with new delegated and implementing act, because whatever is written in the RED has a direct impact on the treatment of fuels in FuelEU and also in the ETS. This slide just quickly to remind you of the obligations on the FuelEU Maritime. So we need to reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of the energy used on board, starting from 2025. The targets are gradually increasing. So the beginning, I think shipping operators will be able to meet compliance with not that radical alterations in their fuel use or in their technological equipment on board. But later on, the targets are becoming more and more ambitious. And we also always emphasize that it's a technology neutral regulation. Operators can choose the fuels and the propulsion technologies that they want to use for meeting compliance. And also there's a flood neutrality applies to all ships calling at European ports. And the second requirement is the use of onshore power supply or zero emission technologies for container and passenger ships as of from the 1st of January 2030. So these are the two key elements. As Manuela said, we are approaching the 1st of January when the FuelEU will be fully applied. But one element already started applying from August. So shipping operators need to submit their monitoring plans starting from August. And we've seen quite a promising level of activities in this sense. We opened the relevant functionalities of the FuelEU database already from August, and we see a big amount of ships registering their FuelEU compliance. I think we are around 80%, and a bit more than 50% already registered their monitoring plans that are being looked at verification agencies right now. And the real obligation, the full obligation will start from January, that operators will need to record data on EU-related voyages from that point on. And the next major deadline will be the submission of the first FuelEU report by 31st of January 2026, and then the verification period will start. So what do we do in the Commission for implementation? First, we have a number of secondary acts that we need to complete. 3 of them are already published and adopted. They are all relating to the governance aspects of the regulation, as you see on the top of the slides. This made it available that monitoring plans are submitted, verification activities are started, and verifiers are accredited. Now we also have 4 other implementing acts that are in the pipeline that we are working on. One is on OPS communication. It's an act that describes what kind of communication ports and ships need to do when the ships want to connect to OPS in a port. This will go for a public feedback in January. Then there's an implementing act on the FuelEU database. This is kind of laying down some access rights and basic features of the database, but we believe that it's not really important for operators. It's more a legal basis for the database. What is important is that the different functionalities are opening gradually in the database for use for shipping companies and verifiers, which is happening regardless of this implementing act. Then we have another act on the criteria for the acceptance of zero emission technologies in ports. This will be again going for public consultation in January. We know that these equipments are rarely used, but we expect them an increasing take-up of such technologies in the future. And finally, there's an implementing act on neighboring transshipment ports, where again there will be a public feedback in December. And here I want to say that ETS has a very similar implementing act, and we've been using the same calculation methods that the ETS was using for the listing of these ports. So the results of our ports and the ETS ports will be actually identical. But the legal text will be coming out about this only in the first quarter of 2025. We've been trying to do together with EMSA a lot of actions that are supporting compliance. We have a Q&A document that is available on our website. We'll be issuing further questions and answers maybe in the coming months. We also have a help desk that is receiving a lot of questions, and we try to answer them the earliest possible date. We've been having a number of webinars on implementation. The past ones, the recordings you can find on the EMSA website, and there will be another one taking place tomorrow that is addressing all stakeholders. And we also had specific webinars that are addressing verifiers and member state authorities about their roles. And we're also working on a guidance document that will be published on the second quarter of 2025. This will be very much like the guidance document that is already issued for the ETS Maritime. But I already advise you to consult the ETS Maritime because it's also having a lot of references to the FuelEU implementation as well. There's a lot of work taking place also in the European Sustainable Shipping Forum. That's an expert group of the Commission. Here we are launching 3 new work streams that are relevant for the immediate implementation of the FuelEU. One about FuelEU calculations, the second one about fuel certification, and the third one is onshore power supply that will be starting in the next few weeks. So here with some stakeholders, we are discussing important questions about the calculations and about the certification, trying to answer questions that are uncertain, that need a time for decision. And the results of this discussion will be published and shared with all stakeholders once the work streams has completed their activities. And we are also planning to launch 3 new work streams in 2025 that are a bit more about longer term issues. They don't need immediate answer, but we would like to start a discussion on them. One is about the use of carbon capture and storage, which is currently not taken into account for FuelEU, but in the future this might change as this technology and the regulation of this technology is becoming more mature. Also to talk about black carbon and also about the updating of emission default factors in Annex 2. So these are all places where we can talk more and come up with some recommendations for the Commission for the interpretation of these issues. Now on this slide, I put down a few key issues of concern that are creating a lot of discussions and a lot of interest from different stakeholders, and I will just go through them very quickly, indicate what the issue is about and how we are trying to address these things. One of them is the issue of carbon leakage and evasive measures. There's a lot of anxiety from some member states or from some ports that shipping operators might actually reroute their traffic patterns. They might try to avoid calling in European ports and move to Southern African or UK ports in order to reduce their exposure to ETS and FuelEU obligations and costs. And this would result in increased emissions and also loss of business for these ports. So the Commission is monitoring these developments very, very, very carefully. And we already started the monitoring on the ETS, which has been already enforced in January 2024. And the monitoring is also covering potential measures that are being done as a response to expectations for the FuelEU obligations. And we're going to report to member states and stakeholders what we found. The preliminary results until September show a lot of changes in the Mediterranean Sea, but these are largely due to the impact of the Red Sea crisis. So we need to look further and see whether truly the rearrangement of traffic or investment patterns in ports is changing, and then we have to see maybe new measures need to be brought into light or into operation. The second big issue is, of course, the availability and the price of alternative fuels. This is a cornerstone of the regulation. It is a key. If there's no good availability and good price for new fuels, then the regulation will not work. We see increasing interest also from buyers, from shipping companies, but also from fuel suppliers. But both sides are a bit still cautious. The original idea that we foresee is that shipping companies will stop bunkering, and they will engage in long-term bunkering arrangements with fuel suppliers. But we hear that for a moment it's not really happening. Shipping companies are quite reluctant to sign up to such long-term agreements. They are still hoping that prices might drop in the future, and they cannot fully predict the precise volumes of fuels that they will need. And suppliers, of course, they see this as a problem. They would like to see commitment for big volumes, as this is important. Volumes are always important for commodity markets. So I think the understanding and the planning of suppliers and demanders of fuels need to be further negotiated and brought to a closer level, to a more rational level. Then another crucial point is fuel certification. The FuelEU regulation says that this is an issue where we need a very clear, very solid, very robust certification system for fuels. And we started designing and developing such a system. The plan is to make the fuel certification for FuelEU as part of the Union database for biofuels, which is a new database where transactions and fuels need to be recorded. And we want shipping to be maritime fuels to be part of this database. This might not happen immediately. We need to do some IT work. So for the first year of implementation for 2024, we are planning for an intermediary, for a transition periods where papers can be used, a proof of compliance and a proof of sustainability papers, and we will move for a fully electronic UDB version only from 2026. So this work is ongoing, and we'll be sharing you the results, the exact requirements that we are putting on the fuel certification requirements. Company strategies for compliance. We see big and small companies trying to create their plans. LNG looks to be quite big for the moment, but we want to emphasize that this is only a fuel of transition, a transitionary fuel towards other fuels that are like biomethane, that has a more significant greenhouse gas reduction impact. We also see a lot of interest for methanol and ammonia ships. The order books, they are showing increasing orders, increasing demand for such ships. So I think companies are looking for their strategies for the short term and also for the long term, more in a 10 years perspective. And finally, I want to mention the pooling mechanism. There's a lot of interest, a lot of questions about this. So as you know, ships can pool in the FuelEU. A good performing ship with excess compliance can redistribute these excess compliance to ships that are having a compliance deficit. So in this way, we try to reward the front runners and give an option for those who are lagging behind to improve their compliance balance. And I think a lot of companies are seeing a way to not just to spread compliance, but also to get rewards for these excess compliance achievement performances. What we always say here is that the Commission is not regulating or is not giving rules and guidance how arrangements between companies who are pooling need to be worked out. It's for private contracts. It's up to the companies how they arrange the compensations between the different ships participating in the pool. The only thing that is relevant from the Commission perspective is whatever is written in the regulation. So if your private arrangements are meeting these requirements, then the pool is valid. The pool is legitimate. So we are trying to put forward this view, this message to shipping companies to the extent possible. The Commission is also operating a number of support mechanisms for maritime decarbonization. There's always a lot of interest and demand for funding. We hear that private funding is not appropriate. Banks and financial institutions are reluctant to finance either the production of alternative fuels, but also modernization of ships or the production of green ships. So there some public funding is helping this process. We have the EU Innovation Fund. Under the Horizon Europe program, we are having budget for research and development for new alternative technologies and fuel types. ETS revenues and fuel penalties, they can also go for decarbonization efforts. And just want to say that the Commission opened a ship financing portal that will be an inventory of financial products that are supporting investments in the shipping sector. And finally, we have the Renewable and Low Carbon Fuel Alliance, where different companies from the supply side and also the demand side are getting together, and they try to do mapping and create cooperation between each other. And also this alliance launched a project pipeline with 12 projects working on boosting the supply of alternative fuels, both for the maritime or for the aviation sector. And on my last slide, I just want to look a little bit to the future. While we are preparing for implementation, while we are supporting implementation, we need to also look at a step further what will happen in late 2025 and in 26. So both the ETS and the FuelEU regulations, they have a close for review, for a comprehensive review. For FuelEU, it's end of 2027. For ETS, it's end of 26. They need to be a comprehensive review. We need to look at all aspects, competitiveness aspects, environmental impacts, how the transport connections are being impacted. Is this regulation meeting its objectives? So we will need to do a comprehensive review. It's new regulation. It's complicated. It's breaking ground for everybody. So obviously we need to rethink a number of elements. Are they working well? Are these elements streamlined between MRV, FuelEU, ETS? And we look at how we can partially simplify, partially add new elements to these regulations so that the level of ambition is maintained, but compliance and implementation is reasonable and effective. Another important element is what's happening on the global level and the IMO negotiations, whereas many of you know that IMO is talking about putting in place some very concrete measures for decarbonization. One of them is a global fuel standard that would be similar to FuelEU. The other one is a global levy that would be similar to EU ETS. So we are monitoring these talks very closely. The EU is pushing for good solutions. And once we have an agreement at the IMO, we need to look at our European regulations as well. There's an obligation. We have a review clause in our legislative text. What can happen if there are good global measures? We need to rethink our regulations. Are they fitting this global framework? Do they need any change? Do they need any streamlining, any simplification, so that the two regimes are seamlessly working together and not causing extra and excessive administrative burden and compliance burden? So we need to rethink the EU regulations in light of the global agreement. And also, the last two bullet point refers to discussions that have started with the new commission that will be coming into its. They will start their activities in December. So we have a request from member state to start developing a new strategy that supports the European maritime industry. There's a realization that in order to meet FuelEU ETS applications, to meet the decarbonization targets, the European maritime industry that is producing new ships or green technologies need to acquire and receive some support in terms of permitting requirements, easier permitting requirements in terms of maybe financing, in terms of other measures. So we're going to talk about this maritime industrial strategy in the next few months. And also the new commission will develop a sustainable transport investment plan that will outline a kind of a strategic approach to boost the supply of sustainable transport fuels, both for aviation and for maritime. So I think this measure will also have a very important impact on fuel availability, fuel price, that will in turn facilitate the implementation and the compliance with the FuelEU regulation. So that's what I wanted to tell you very quickly about the kind of the political background and general background that is happening on the FuelEU and also about related measures that should be supporting implementation and compliance.
Thank you, Peter, for this comprehensive overview that I think it's really what we need to kick off this session, because of course there is a clear legal framework that has been put in place with clear objectives, and the implementation phase, of course, has already started in terms of all the preparatory steps, and as you correctly advised, as of August, also the monitoring plans function is actively used by the industry. So its dates are always translated into daily daily tasks that the stakeholders have to implement. And we are also aware that the competent authorities of the member states are very much engaged in these preparatory steps. Any questions for Peter? I mean, his presentation was very clear, very straightforward, and also he hinted a bit of what has to come. I have Malta.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for the presentation. Although it has already been mentioned by Peter, I really need to highlight what he stated as anxiety from transshipment hubs relating to ETS. It is genuine anxiety, and I think with ETS and the carbon leakage, for those who are familiar with the liner trades, the rerouting is a reality. So I think it's very important, and I have not seen it a lot, that we strike the balance with maintaining the competitivity of EU ports, also bearing in mind that apart from the carbon leakage, the ETS is actually, the shipping lines have actually introduced a surcharge, so it is going down to the end consumer. So my appeal is we are all on board with decarbonization, but let's strike a balance between competitivity, value added, and also achieving our goals. And I say this because transshipment hubs depend very much in terms of profitability and sustainability on volumes. And if it is only a small percentage of the volumes that moves away, that can make a transshipment hub uncompetitive. And that's also where a lot of value-added jobs depend on volumes, such as the services rendered by dockers, pilots, tugs, etc. So for me, I have to make a statement, an appeal that within this concept of decarbonization, we strike the balance for sustainability and competitivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Malta. Peter, do you want to react to this statement? You already said very well that there are some concerns that the Commission, with our support, is of course investigating. Peter?
Yes, no, thank you for the intervention. Indeed, I took very good note of it. We are receiving it from many member states, including from Malta. As I said, there's a serious monitoring exercise ongoing. The final results will be released at the end of this year, but next year the monitoring will continue. And the Commission is ready to consider measures in the both in the ETS and the FuelEU if we are finding evidence of moving traffic from transshipment ports from Europe to other parts, other neighboring countries. So this is very high on the agenda to respond to these concerns and try to find a solution that is settling this issue in a manner that is satisfactory for everybody.
Thanks for this reassuring statement. And we have the Copenhagen Business School.
Thanks a lot. I just have a question to ask for an update. One of the measures that was included in the basket of measure was a revision of the ETD, which is the only one that, to my knowledge, has not actually gone through. So I was wondering whether you have any information on what is the current status of that important component of the package.
Peter, please.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Indeed, ETDs discussions on ETDs happening right now under the Hungarian presidency. Obviously, the question is what will happen to the taxation of maritime fuels. I think there's a good understanding inside the Commission that maritime fuels are a special type of fuels, and taxing them unilaterally in Europe would have serious negative consequences on bunkering here in Europe. It would create a level playing field that is not valid anymore. So I think the final position of the Commission on this issue will be reflecting these concerns, but discussions are still ongoing between member states and the Commission, so the outcome is not clear yet.
Thank you. First, Cyprus.
Thank you and good morning. I would like also to underline and the views expressed by Malta. Just for our knowledge, there was a movement or a declaration from a number of ministers, especially in the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean ports are the first to be affected by the competitiveness issue of ETS and FuelEU Maritime. Okay, I can understand that for the time being there are two ports included on transshipment ports, Tangier in Morocco and one in Egypt, the north or the south part of ports of Suez. I'm not sure about that. And there is another issues in respect of the implementation of transshipment port. If a ship delivers all of her cargo to this port and then that ship never calls at a European port, there is no way to apply the provisions either of ETS or FuelEU Maritime, because the only way to apply a regulation is to chase the ship. If that ship never comes to Europe, it will be a mission impossible. And if you allow me, I will also like to offer some general views in respect of FuelEU Maritime. There are some implementing acts still pending, so I can understand that is not the responsibility of EMSA, of Commission, it's a responsibility of everybody, of member states and the Commission. But in order to give to the industry a clarity, we should proceed as soon as possible and complete the whole legislative package. I will refrain to make any specific examples, but we should act immediately in order to complete the package. And something for the last one, and I hope that we will have some, let's say, responses during the seminar. As an administrating authority, there are a lot of issues related with FuelEU Maritime that we have some concerns, especially on the issue of fleet compliance, because it seems by this regulation, we have also to control ships for which we are not the administrating authority. Because with fleet compliance, a ship owner has the right to put in this fleet every ship that they like. So this will create burdens in administering authorities, because we do want to have control on this operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyprus. I have Croatia.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was really clear, and I hope you all can see that the timeline for it's in application since the January the 1st, and also some implemented acts will not be made well into the 2025. So I would like to echo my colleagues from Cyprus and Malta, as Mediterranean countries are really facing the biggest issues regarding these carbon leakage risks, and that's it. That's all I wanted to say, just to support those statements. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We take Ireland, and then I give the floor to Peter for some remarks. Ireland.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. Absolutely support the comments from our colleague from Malta. Sustainability is incredibly important. Ireland is a high ambition country when it comes to emission reduction and a big supporter of the measures that have been put in place. But we must recognise that not even transshipment is particularly a problem. Our closest neighbour is no longer a member of the EU. There is an economic risk to Ireland with regards to this. There is a cost with regards to this. And the simple fact is, there was a point made there that from a shipping perspective, that cost is being transferred directly onto the end user. So maybe there is a review due in 2026 for ETS. We need to consider, well, it is a revenue gathering exercise and there is value in that. Is it actually a dissuasive process or activity with regards to shipping companies? And that was part of the original intention. And I suspect it probably isn't too much. So while there is value in it, maybe the value doesn't fully reside in the areas that we expected that it did. But we need to be considerate of all of the island nations within the EU and the limits that they have with regards to how their economies continue to work and are sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ireland. Peter, you want to take some of these comments?
Sure. No, I heard the comments from further 3 countries about the carbon leakage issue. I just want to say that this issue has been discussed indeed at the summit of the Transport Council, the summit of transport ministers in June, following the submission of 7 countries, 7 Southern European countries, articulating their concerns. And now there will be another Transport Council on the 5th of December. And I saw that it is addressed on an AOB, any other business part of the agenda. So I think our ministers and our new commissioner will be there and will be paying attention and discussing this issue. So on the highest possible level, this issue is getting attention, and hopefully a solution will be found in case the carbon leakage really happens to be an issue that the risk of carbon leakage is really being proven, and we find evidence for that. About the legislative package, I took notes, of course, of your concerns and call for finishing these processes as soon as possible. The way we work in the Commission is a very long, from writing the draft regulation, there's a very long bureaucratic process of getting the agreements. But all these things will be for public consultation in December. So operators will see how these legislative acts will look like. But we will do our best to accelerate their finalization and publication. The question from Cyprus on fleet compliance. Yes, we see that differences between ETS and FuelEU, they are creating some difficulties for administering state, and that's why we started having discussions with representatives from member states on their enforcement regimes. We had a meeting in October, and in January we shall have a second one. So where we try to compare enforcement mechanisms between different countries, and also trying to create guidelines and advise how enforcement could or should be done for FuelEU. And finally, just talking the responding to Ireland. Truly, as I said, there's a comprehensive review that is due for 26 for the ETS, for 27 for the FuelEU. The Commission will do a report on our views, and then this will be discussed with member states. So member states, they will have the opportunity to put forward their proposals and their opinion, how they see the ETS and the FuelEU, and especially countries that are not having a border with other EU member states, where actually already some exemptions, some possibilities for exemptions are existing for such countries to exempt certain vessels from the FuelEU regulation. I think that's a quick reaction to these questions and remarks.
Thank you, Peter. I take a last question, then we need to move to the other presentations. SGMF.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. I'll bring back to a more technical element of the FuelEU. Obviously, all is based around the carbon intensity of the fuel. You mentioned some work need to be done on the Annex 2, so these are the full value, and also question about actual value. How this is going to be addressed. I'm sure you're looking at what's happened over in London in IMO, but FuelEU obviously started on just over a month from now. We're missing some of the pathway, how they can prove actual value or ship owner that do more than it was supposed to be. Can you give some clarification? What is the approach that you want to take moving forward? And if there are going to be some interim measure in the meantime? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so the regulation is giving the possibility for the Commission to introduce changes in the emission default factors that are listed in Annex 2. Once there's new data or numbers are appearing, so we keep this on our agenda to find the right time and the right place, but we don't have a firm position when and how these default factors could be updated, but we're going to do it when it is necessary, depending on IMO negotiations, depending on changes in the RED. So this is something to be happen, but its time is to be determined.
Thank you, Peter, very much also for your quick reactions. Clearly, it's the landscape is evolving, and we know that. There are also other passions that have an impact on the traffic. We know very well that geopolitical scenarios are still quite complicated. But what you can count on is the commitment stated very clearly by Peter that everything will be monitored very closely. And if needed be, of course, revisions will take place. And there is also the international dimension that was in one of the final slides of Peter as well, that will also be benchmarking in the future. Okay, we move on for the first, let's say, more technical presentation that will focus on the compliance process, which is the big process for the implementation of FuelEU Maritime. And I give the floor to Mattia Friolo from the Sustainability Unit at EMSA. Mattia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuela, and for the introduction. I'm Mattia Friole, Project Officer for Sustainability here at EMSA at the Unit 11. And in my presentation, we will see the different roles of the stakeholders involved in the FuelEU Maritime Regulation, their responsibilities, and which are the procedures for being compliant for the ship. This is the agenda of my presentation. First, we will... I don't know if you can see my presentation. Yes. So this is the agenda of my presentation. First, we will go through the timeline for the FuelEU Maritime compliance process. Then we will see which are the input data needed by the companies. Then we will delve into the greenhouse gas intensity calculations and the calculation of the compliance balance. Then for the companies, it's possible to apply for the flexibility mechanism to be compliant with the regulation. And then there is the calculation of the penalties and the additional checks by the administrative states. In the end, we will see the issuance of the document of compliance for the ship. So first of all, why FuelEU? As Peter said, FuelEU Maritime Regulation is a regulation that promotes the use of renewable and low-carbon fuels in the maritime transport. So while instruments such as the carbon pricing promote improvements in energy efficiency, these are not suited to bring out a significant shift towards renewable and low-carbon fuels. In addition, the AFIR, for example, is a regulation that is affecting the ship when they are at berth. So we need another regulation that address the ships when they are at sea. So the FuelEU Maritime compliance process could be seen as a process where we have central metrics where an input data enters and then we have an output. The input data from the ships required to the ships are the fuel consumption and the energy used once they are at berth, so the onshore power supply and the zero emission technologies. Once we have this input data, the verifiers should run the calculation for the greenhouse gas intensity and the compliance balance, and of course assesses the non-compliant port calls. Then the companies can apply, of course, for the flexibility mechanism, and again the verifiers assess the flexibility mechanism for the compliance of the ship. In the end, the output is the final compliance balance of the ship and the issuance of the document of compliance that is issued by the verifiers or by the administering states if there are penalties to be paid. So this is the timeline of the FuelEU Maritime Regulation. Since early August this year, there was the submission of the ship monitoring plans by the companies to the verifiers that assessed the monitoring plans. And then since 1st of January 2025, we will have basically two periods, the reporting period and the verification period. The reporting period is generically the year N, and the verification period is the year N+1. During the first reporting period and all the following ones, the ships have to monitor and record data of the energy used on board the ship, and then they will have to submit the FuelEU report with this data to the verifiers within the 31st of January of the verification period. The verifiers then verifies the FuelEU report and then calculate the greenhouse gas intensity and the compliance balance of the ship within the 31st of March. Then the compliance balance returns to the companies that may apply for the flexibility mechanism within the 30th of April, and then there is the approval by the verifier of the verified compliance balance. If the compliance balance is positive, then the verifier will issue a document of compliance within the 30th of June. Otherwise, the administering state have to calculate the penalties for the compliance balance that is negative or for non-compliant port calls. And then after the payment of the penalties by the companies, there is the issuance of the new document of compliance by the administering state. In any case, during the whole process of the FuelEU Maritime, the administering state are allowed to do additional checks during the whole process and issues new report and calculate the new compliance balance for the ships. So the input data are for example, the ones reported in the monitoring plan and the FuelEU report, that are the two main documents provided by the companies. In the monitoring plan, we have the ship permanent characteristics, and in the FuelEU report, we have the energy used by the ship, basically. So the annual fuel consumption at sea, the annual energy used by the ship at berth, so with onshore power supply, zero emission technologies or substitute source of energy, and then there is also the declaration of the annual energy exemptions. So once we have the energy that has been used by the ship during the reporting period, then we have to allocate this energy for the scope of FuelEU Maritime. The first exemption for the ship, for the energy used by the ship, is the energy used due to sailing in ice or due to the ice class. Then there is the annual aggregation of the energy per geographic scope and per derogation, as per the Article 2 of the FuelEU Maritime Regulation. Then the energy that has been allocated, has been aggregated per derogation, can be deducted as per the Article 2 again of the FuelEU Maritime Regulation. And then in the end, there is also the deduction of the energy out of scope for the international voyages and for the outermost regions voyages. So once we have the input data that are actually the energy used on board, the FuelEU Maritime Regulation establishes a formula for the calculation of a greenhouse gas intensity of the ship that takes an approach of a well-to-wake performance, and so the greenhouse gas performance of the fuels should be assessed on a well-to-wake basis, taking into account the impacts of the energy production, transport, distribution, bunkering of the fuels, and then the use of the fuels on board. The greenhouse gas intensity will be compared to greenhouse gas intensity limits set by the regulation that are increasing every 5 years, up to the reduction of the 80% of the first reference value, that is 91.16 gram of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. In the input data, we were missing an important factor that are the relevant emission factors of the fuel consumed. In order to consider a well-to-wake performance, the actual and default emission factors need to be used. So for fossil fuel, the default values as defined in the Annex 2 of the FuelEU regulation, the emission factors for the well-to-tank and the tank-to-wake for CO2 emissions have to be used. Instead, for the other non-CO2 emission factors and for the slippage could be used actual emission factors. This applies for the well-to-tank and the tank-to-wake emission factors for the biofuels and the synthetic fuels. For the shore power, instead, the emission factor is always 0. In the formula, we were missing another factor, that is the wind assisted propulsion reward. And this is a factor that is given in function of the installed wind power on board. The FuelEU rewards, so the wind installed power, up to 0.95 of the reward factor. This factor is outside, let's say, of the main formula, but maybe in the future it could be considered inside the well-to-tank and the tank-to-wake formula of the greenhouse gas intensity. So once we have the greenhouse gas intensity of the ship for the reporting period, and once we consider the greenhouse gas intensity target for the reporting year, we can calculate the initial compliance balance, multiplying this subtraction here by the energy in scope used by the ship. Once we have the initial compliance balance, we have to consider the banked compliance surplus from the previous reporting period and the advanced compliance, the banked compliance surplus of the previous reporting period. And so we can obtain the adjusted compliance balance of the reporting period. Once we have the adjusted compliance surplus, we can find ourselves in two situations. We can have a surplus or a deficit, basically. And since the compliance with this regulation will depend on elements that might be behind the control of the companies, such as fuel availability or fuel qualities, the companies are allowed to apply for a flexibility mechanism that includes different compliance options, such as the banking, pooling, and borrowing. And of course, the payment of the penalties is another option for being compliant with this regulation. So this is the timeline for applying for the flexibility mechanism. Once we have the submission by the verifier within the 31st of March of the adjusted compliance balance, the companies may apply for the flexibility mechanism within the 30th of April of the verification period with the pooling, banking, or borrowing. And then after that, within the 30th of June, there is the issuance of the document of compliance with a verified compliance balance that could be positive or negative. In case it is negative, then there are penalties to be calculated by the administering state and paid by the companies. So the first compliance option is the borrowing. What is borrowing? Actually, a company can borrow a certain amount of compliance balance from the following verification period. This amount of compliance balance should be given back the following year with 10% more, so it will be an aggravated advanced compliance surplus. The maximum amount that can be borrowed during the verification period is the one shown in the slide in the formula, so the 2% multiplied by the greenhouse gas intensity target for the year considered, multiplied by the energy used by the ship in scope of FuelEU. There are specific rules for the borrowing, that a ship cannot borrow more than 2 consecutive reporting periods. And if the ship then, during the following year, has no port calls in Europe, it has to pay a penalty corresponding to the aggravated advance compliance surplus. Another compliance option for the companies is the banking. During the verification period, the ships can have a surplus that could be banked. These banked surplus are cumulative and they don't have an expiration date. So during the following years, the companies can use the banked surplus in case the ship has a deficit for the compliance balance. The last flexibility mechanism options is the pooling. As said by Peter before, pooling is for a group of ships that use the overperformance of one ship to compensate the underperformance of other ships, provided that the total pooled compliance is positive. In fact, we have some preconditions, and the most important is that the sum of the initial compliance balance of the ships included in the pool is positive. Then, of course, the other preconditions are that the ship is in scope of FuelEU. The ship then hasn't borrowed compliance in the current verification period, and the ship is not included in another pool of compliance, and the ships must have a valid document of compliance from the previous verification periods. So, how is the process for the pooling? The company, a starter company, will identify all the ships, even from other companies, and this starter company will be the responsible for the allocation of the new compliance balances for all the ships. Then the other companies have to accept or reject the proposal by the first company, that once the allocation is done, will identify the unique verifier for the pool. The unique verifier for the pool would be different from the ones that calculated the compliance balance within the 31st of March of the verification period. There are some rules for the pooling allocation, and the first one is that the ships with a compliance surplus may not have a compliance deficit after the allocation, and ships which had a compliance deficit must not have a higher deficit after the allocation of the pooling mechanism. This is the timeline for the pooling. So first we have the FuelEU report that is assessed by the verifier A, then the calculation of the compliance balance within the 31st of March. Then we will have the pooling allocation that could be verified by another verifier, and then within the 30th of April, we can bank or then have a deficit if there was not the possibility to have a positive compliance balance. And within the 30th of June, there will be the issuance of a document of compliance if there is no deficit. So the calculation of the penalties that have to be done by the administering state. The penalties are penalties to be paid or for the negative compliance balance or for non-compliant port calls for the requirements of Article 6 about the onshore power supply. The penalties calculated for the compliance balance negative are the ones shown in the formula here and takes into consideration the compliance balance of the verification period and the greenhouse gas intensity. The non-compliant port calls penalties instead are proportional to the non-compliant hours spent at berth and the total electrical power demand of the ship at berth that was defined in the initial monitoring plans. Once the penalties are paid, then the administering state issue the document of compliance for the ship. There could be even the possibility for the administering state to have additional checks during the whole process. The mandatory duty is to calculate the penalties if we have a negative compliance balance or a non-compliant port call during the reporting period. But they are allowed to run additional checks during the whole process, and they can raise other issues and recalculate the compliance balance for the ships. So in the end, we have the issuance or by the verifier or by the administering state of the document of compliance that should be held on board the ship as evidence of their compliance with the limits of the greenhouse gas intensity and the obligation to use the onshore power supply at berth, this since 2030. Verifiers and administering states should record in the FuelEU database, the TETIS MRV system, the document of compliance of the ships, and the document of compliance is valid for 18 months after the end of the reporting period or until a new FuelEU document of compliance is issued. Where a ship fails to comply with the obligations set out in Article 24 of the FuelEU Maritime Regulation for 2 or more consecutive reporting periods, the administering state have to can permit the ship to enter the administering state port in Europe. So thanks. This was all by my side.
Thank you very much, Mattia, for this comprehensive overview, including the flexibility mechanisms. I have Ireland.
Thank you very much. Useful indeed. I have a question as regards to the penalties. So the penalties are obviously a sliding scale depending on the non-conformance and the calculation. But one of the things in there, which you mentioned twice, is that if the penalty is paid, it means that the vessel is now compliant and a certificate is issued. That triggers a concern because for high-value trade routes for particular ships that are regularly non-compliant, all they have to do is pay the penalty, transfer the cost of the penalty onto the end user, and they'll never be compliant. Is there a limit to how much allowance we provide with regards to non-compliance and the payment of penalty? We actually think that achieving compliance through the payment of a penalty is probably not ideal. Thank you.
Maybe this question is better for Peter if he's still with us, because it's really, let's say, the compliance strategy he referred to. Peter, you are still with us? No. Okay, then my side of the table. No, Peter is here, maybe? No. Okay. Our side of the table.
Well, I think that in the regulation there is not a limit on the penalties by this view, but I think that the Commission should address this question more extensively. It's my opinion about this.
If you don't mind, Peter is not with us. Okay, we will relay your question because, as I said, it's compliance strategy. So it's, we support, we implement. So we will need the Commission for this. But we will relay your question to Peter as soon as he connects again with us. I have Germany.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everybody. So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation, and we have 2 questions regarding OPS, onshore power supply. So there are ships, for example, who, if you have an LNG ship, you may not be able to switch to onshore power supply because of safety reasons, because you may face the risk that your pressure relief valves will activate in the port. And then may create dangerous situation, or at least you have increased methane slip, which is a greenhouse gas. And the other question would be, if you go to onshore power, what about systems on the ship like heating systems, for example, boilers? Is heating, so the question is the OPS power only linked to the electrical power you use on the ship, so that heating systems are exempted, or how is this regulated? Because also nowadays, normally boilers, they stay in operation, although it's not a big issue, but some keep up their heated systems For example, if you have a ship operating on scrubber systems, where you still have on board heavy fuel oil, you need some heating for fuel tanks. This would be our question. Thank you.
Sergio.
Yeah, thank you very much. These are questions that we are still trying to understand the practicalities, how this will be implemented on the total power that is required for switching for electricity. This is related to the main switchboard on board. So all the systems that are depending on the electricity from the main switchboard will have to be connecting to the onshore power supply. And there are also exemptions for, of course, safety reasons. Whenever this is not possible, of course, this is addressed in the regulation. And perhaps you say you can complement.
Thank you, Serge. Yes, so under the article of the zero emission technologies and the OPS, it is foreseen the exemptions for a special circumstance. And the OPS connections is foreseen for having the switch from the electrical power demand on the ship to the OPS, which means if the ship is using not an electricity for the heat demand, it will be it's not under the obligation to change boilers to electricity heating systems. So if there is the ship has a boiler to do the heating and doesn't have an electricity system to do that, it is outside of the scope of the requirement. So it's clearly linked to the power demand of the ship, the electricity part, not other systems, that it's not included in the electrical load balance. Thank you.
Cyprus.
Thank you. First of all, allow me to congratulate Matteo for his presentation. I must confess that I was an eyewitness of several presentations, and I must confess that this one was short, comprehensive, and understandable. And he almost responded to all questions with one minor exception when he was referring to the control by administering states, not administering authority, because administering authority related to the ETS. He avoided to explain how administrative states will control the procedure in the case of fleet compliance, and it's related with my previous intervention that, at least in our considered opinion, there is a confusion how we will control this procedure. And if you allow me just to make some more, let's say, comments and not questions, and it's related again with the administering states and the industry, and not the verifiers, because verifiers know very well how to do their jobs. We have, and there is a possibility to have different shipping companies on ETNs and FuelEU Maritime. For FuelEU Maritime, it's crystal clear, is the ISM operator and end of story. And on ETS, is the shipping owner, and maybe he can forward this responsibility to other entities. This creates additional problems, but anyhow, we were the co-legislators and we accept it, but just to have it in mind that it may create problems, because sometimes the ship owner will believe that everything is okay with FuelEU and ETS, but this is not the story, because there are different shipping companies and maybe in different administrative states. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you for the question. Related to the regulated entity, what we have seen from the discussion starting from DTS is whichever is the decision, there will be some parts that will be not happy due to the complexity of the maritime sector. So we are Commission, and in the exchange, now we have the charterers asking what are their roles and if they shouldn't be part of the regulated entities. So it is a complex. That's the first thing that we should recognize. Maritime sector is complex, and one option, it's very clear for some ship owners that they want to assume all the responsibilities. In other ones, there is the technical manager that is dealing with the daily tasks of the ship, and for sure they are, in most of the cases, the ones that have the information to report fuel consumption, so they want to assume that part. So it is having it. The Commission is building the knowledge and listening to the different parts, but for sure there is no solution that will please all. That's what we are seeing from the different discussions and what has happened from DTS and what is happening now. Like it was said, it's crystal clear that under the FuelEU is the ISM companies, and then we will progress to the IMO and the future amendments and to see who it's going to be, but not an easy discussion. Regarding the pooling, so before the pooling, there will be a verified compliance balance by the verifier for the ship, where there is clearly an administering state responsible. Then there is the pooling and a verifier allocated for the pooling. So what's happening before the pooling, it's, in my view, clear who is the administering state responsible and the verifier. And after the pooling, and the pooling, the rules establish from that starting point that we know what is the compliance amount, the surplus and the deficit, because that was verified. Then they do the allocation. Following the allocation of the pooling, it comes back to the ship verifier and to the same administering state to do the compliance of the ship. So during the enforcement, in my view, the verified compliance balance that is getting into the pooling, if administering state detects some issue in a ship that is outside of its responsibility, it should really liaise with the other administering state, but is on the basis of verified report by a verifier that can be enforced by a different administering state. So what's happening in the pool, it's on a very limited timing, and the information and the rules is clearly defined in the regulation. So it's just a middle step before and after. It is clearly for the ship verifier and for the administering state. Hope it was clear.
Please.
Just an additional point. Okay, thank you for the answer. But the crucial question is, as administering state, which in this pooling system there are some ships under my administering authority, and some other ships that we cannot control because I'm not the administering authority. Is it possible through the, let's say, the EU, EU, to have access also on these ships, just to be in a position to verify that there was a surplus on the ship that I'm not the administering state? Because I'm responsible for the control only for ships that I'm an administering state, but they will take advantage and reduce the penalty, or actually no penalty, from ships that are controlled by another state, at least to have access.
Thank you, Cyprus. What we can say is that we are at the moment developing the specifications for how the flexibility mechanism will actually be implemented in Thetis MRV. And we are taking into account your concern because our role will be to facilitate, of course, your work, but this is still in the process of being developed.
Okay, I will take one more question. Then you talk during the coffee break. I have SGMF, and then we go for coffee break.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, want to just reiterate with the intervention for Germany, OPS and both concerning LNG vessel today, but in the future, any low flashpoint fuel, so ammonia, hydrogen will go in the same direction. LNG carrier or flashpoint fuel in the future, if they're going to be included OPS, is more than trivial. I know there is a new stream they will look at OPS. I trust that EMSA Boro is expert in that stream to help to support the case and making sure that any policy is implemented correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, we are actually following the work streams in the SSA. We are present in all of them. We are just trying to address all the concerns and making sure that we are also driving the process so that we can implement this in our 30 MRV in a consistent way with the legislation and with all the stakeholders. So yes, we are following this very closely.
Okay, we break here now for coffee. We reconvene at 11:15 sharp because we have still 2 presentations that we would like to share with you. So 11:15 sharp, we start again. Thank you. Welcome back. We will continue now to dig further in FuelEU Maritime. Already the Commission move referred to a robust system for certification on marine fuels this morning as one of the pillars. We will have now a presentation exactly focused on this by José Barradas, Project Officer in our unit Sustainability. José, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuela, for giving me the floor. And thank you to all for being here. So I have 10 minutes to talk about fuel certification. So for sure, who deals with the issue knows that 10 minutes to talk about fuel certification, it's not much, but I will try my best. So the first thing, everybody is aware, FuelEU Maritime is a well-to-wake approach. And what does this mean? This means that the emissions from the initial feedstock, the production, the extraction, till the transport, till the production, including carbon capture, capture utilization, and replacement, has to be accounted. So every step of the process needs to account, and there is the need to have a clear and transparent reporting system and a chain of custody to control the emissions, to accurately report and to calculate the greenhouse gas intensity from all the supply chain till the usage on board of the ship. I will start by focusing on the well-to-tank. So what FuelEU Maritime approach did was for fossil fuels, and when we talk about fossil fuels, we are talking about the main fossil fuels used in the maritime sector. The well-to-tank emission factors account about 15 to 20%. So if you can have an improvement, it will be very reduced. So what FuelEU Maritime established to limit the investment in very small improvements in terms of emissions was it established a very a simplified approach, meaning only default values can be used for the fossil fuels on the well-to-tank. When we go to other fuels, renewable and low-carbon fuels, they will have a very different performance depending on how they are produced. For this one, FuelEU Maritime will rely in the methodology foreseen in the European for all the sectors by the Renewable Energy Directive and by the Hydrogen and Gas Directive. I will go a little bit more on the details. What is the legislation foreseen for for the different types of fuels, but of course, I cannot go into the details of the methodology in the time that we have. Besides the fuels, there is also the electricity issue. The approach that FuelEU Maritime followed was that for the time being, all electricity supplied by the OPS is considered as zero emissions. However, it is foreseen under the review clause that at a later stage, emissions from the production of electricity could also be accounted in the calculation of the greenhouse gas intensity. The information to be provided, it is already foreseen or included in the methodology for the other fuels, namely if there is a power purchase agreement or guarantees of origin for electricity and the amount of the intensity for the production of electricity, and on a voluntary basis, it will be allowed to companies to report for the electricity that will be consumed on board. However, it will be zero rated for the time being. If we look to the current landscape of the legislations on the energy and how to account emissions, we can see more or less this type of fuels that is present. So we have the Renewable Energy Directive that for renewable fuels, they are considered fuels from biomass and fuels from renewable fuels non-biological origin. If we go to the biomass fuels, the fuels that are relevant for the FuelEU Maritime are the biofuels and the biogas, namely biomethane. If we look more closely for the biofuels, FuelEU Maritime is excluding biofuels that come from the food and feed crops, normally called the first generation biofuels. And the reason is that FuelEU Maritime intends to promote fuels for the long term and not fuels that would be considered as a transitional fuel. So FuelEU Maritime will try to promote the second generation and the advanced biofuels. The other ones will not be promoted and will be considered to have the same emission factors of the fossil fuels. More recently, we have adopted this year, or the Commission adopted this year, the Hydrogen and Gas Directive, so to foresee and to establish methodologies to account the emissions from the production of low-carbon fuels. In terms of what it is foreseen for the methodology, we have for the biomass fuels the methodology under the annex of the RED directive. For the RFNBOs and recycled carbon fuels, there is a delegated act under the RED that established the methodology for the greenhouse gas savings. And for the low carbon fuels, it is at the moment under discussion. It was already made the public consultation. What will be the methodology to account the greenhouse gas emissions for the low carbon fuels? What are the main issues about the certification of these alternative fuels? One of the first requirements is the greenhouse gas savings, that it has to be over 70%, in biofuels 65% of the fossil fuel comparator, that it is 94 grams of CO2 per megajoule. But there is also additional requirements. Yesterday, it was mentioned, the biodiversity, and this is foreseen, and it is controlled to be a sustainable fuel. So RED foresees requirements to determine what it is a biofuel from a sustainable feedstock. It was discussed yesterday about the production of synthetic fuels, the origin of the CO2. So the origin of the CO2, there is also specific requirements that the starting point until 2035 or 2040, depending on the sector, we can have carbon capture and utilization from fossil fuels, but then this will have to be transitioned for carbon capture and utilization from renewable fuels that can be either sustainable biofuels, or it can be a circular basis from RFNBOs. There is also specific requirements for the electricity production. So the electricity production has to come from renewable sources, and there is also specific requirement that this electricity production needs to have an additionality criteria. This is to avoid diverting the existing renewable electricity production for the production of fuel. So the electricity used for the production of the fuels is also controlled. Under the last row, we will see some issues about the synthetic low-carbon fuels. This is closely linked to the production or to the delegated act that is still under discussion. It also includes some issues about the origin of the CO2, the electricity production, and this is to be very similar to what is happening for the RFNBOs. But for the low-carbon fuels, there is also the issues that it is closely linked to the recently adopted regulation for methane emissions, that it is important to control methane emissions from the upstream, and there is specific requirements to control fugitive emissions from the extraction and transport of methane. And there will be stringent regulations and requirements for the methane. how it is controlled, the certification of the process. So it is foreseen under the RED, two processes. One of them is each member state can establish national certification schemes, and another option is for the European Commission to recognize voluntary certification schemes. So the operators will establish an agreement with the voluntary certification scheme that will then make agreements with the certification bodies that will do the audits of the certified operators. This is to guarantee that all the process of the chain of custody and all the emissions that is being accounted are controlled. From what's happening in the upstream to what is happening on the transfer of the information, like it is stated here, the POS with the bunker delivery note, there is ongoing discussions because what's foreseen under the RED is mainly for the quota obligation parties foreseen under the RED. So, but now we are reusing the information for both scopes, for the quota foreseen under the RED and for the objectives of FuelEU Maritime and under the ETS scope. So we need to further detail how this information should be detailed for both scopes. Going now a bit further for the tank-to-wake methodology, it is important to understand that under the FuelEU Maritime, we differentiate the combustion emissions from the slippage and fugitive emissions. So under the combustion emissions, one of the main elements is the emission factor for CO2, and it's important to understand that CO2 emission factor is based on the carbon content, which means we don't need to go on board and measure CO2 emissions because the emission factor is determined by laboratory analysis of the carbon content of the fuel. When we go to the N2O, the methane, or the slippage, this is quite different because we need to actually measure what's happening on board because this is dependent on the technology that is being used on board. So for this reason, the fossil fuels emission factor of CO2 is a default value. For other fuels, the CO2, because we can have different molecules under the alternative fuels, they can use actual values based on laboratory analysis. And for the other emission factors, is being discussed how it will be established actual values. It is important to note that for non-CO2 emissions, if we are talking about combustion emissions, they represent a very small amount of the emissions, less than 2%. However, if we are talking slippage from LNG engines, they can count up to 25% of the emissions from the tank to wake. There is another uncertainty related to the ammonia engines that we don't know exactly what will be the levels of N2O and how much it will represent. This is why we definitely need procedures to do the actual measurements. One of the principles that was agreed under the IMO OCA guidelines is to use the NOx technical codes as a basis for the measurements. However, the current test cycles is being criticized by not representing the actual profile of operation of the ships. So there is ongoing discussions to understand exactly how to look at this approach. One of the proposed alternatives is to use engine load monitoring, but exactly how to adapt the test bed measurements for the engine load monitoring is still under discussion. Another option is the continuous emission monitoring system, but also challenges is appearing because the simplified approach used for the accounting for emissions for the scrubbers, the CO2, that is based on the ratio of CO2, SO2 with CO2, it's not viable. At least there is no agreement that that approach should be used. So further discussions are needed to have an agreement based on this and to have an agreement how the procedure should be made on board to establish actual values. Just to say that what's happening on the tank to wake will be reported and verified in the systems managed by EMSA in the implementation of the FuelEU database. I will not talk much about this because my colleague Caroline will talk and address the issues in the following presentation. And I just wanted to finalize my presentation with a quick overview of what's happening in the FuelEU Maritime and what will be addressed on what is being already addressed in the discussions in the IMO. If we look to both FuelEU and the IMO LCA guidelines, both is following a well-to-wake approach. The emission factors, if we look to the well-to-tank, it was based on European data. Here in the emission factors for the well-to-tank under the LCA guidelines, a more general approach will have to be followed. But when we look to the tank-to-wake and what's happening, the data that's being used for the time being is what's coming up from the IMO study, the fourth IMO study. So the data is very similar. And what's happening under the discussions to determine actual values on the tank-to-wake, we are following the discussions. The current IMO correspondence group was triggered also by the discussions in the ESSF SAPs. So the discussion is being followed closely. The certification schemes, we have it for the FuelEU. It is being progressed, the discussion, because the methodology foreseen for RFNBOs and the upcoming methodology for the low carbon fuels, it is still on the process of implementation. And the IMO, what we see is that it was requested to the parties to submit considerations for the MPC 83, so it seems that this methodology will also be followed. It was discussed yesterday, the role that could happen for the onboard carbon capture. The onboard carbon capture for the production, it is already included in the methodology foreseen under the RED for the RFNBOs, and it is also foreseen to be included in the methodology for the production of the low carbon fuels under the FuelEU, and with the scope of the tank to wake, it's not foreseen at the moment, but it is under the review clause. Under the IMO, the discussion is ongoing, but it's needed to clarify how to control all the value, all the chain since the moment that the carbon is captured till the final destination, regardless if it is storage or further utilization. One just final point that it's frequently asked, the global warming potential. For the moment, FuelEU is using it is included in the annex of the RED. Ongoing discussions to revise and to update the global warming potential is ongoing. It is unclear if it will be updated to the assessment report 4 or assessment report 6. And it is also unclear in terms of the methane, if it will be made a distinction between fossil and non-fossil. What we have under the IMO LCA guidelines is the assessment report 5. But the final remark that I just wanted to address is that we are progressing. There was a lot of work that was done, triggered by the adoption of FuelEU Maritime. We are in our process to develop the methodology, and much need to be addressed further. But it is also, and in our understanding, the need to a constant update of the methodology based on the evidence of the scientific research that is being made. So it is a process that will continue ongoing and being developed as much as the scientific evidence comes and appears, because there is continuous investigation, namely an international level, but also funded by the European Commission to establish emission factors and to understand better how the emissions will impact. And this was what I had for this quick overview of the certification of marine fuels. Much more would have to be said, but I will leave it for now. Thank you very much.
So you get a bit of flavor. It's a very complex issue, of course. We know that there is still work ongoing. So also you may have a lot of questions, but there may not be answers. So I will just open the floor for a couple of questions, if there are any, in relation to this overview on FuelEU. Please, Carnival.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank the presenter for that. It's very helpful to see where the Commission sees itself in these issues and where we see the challenges. And I have to say that this is probably the most challenging part of getting prepared for FuelEU Maritime from our perspective. We've been doing trials on a number of different types of alternative fuels, and as we approach our verifiers, I won't say it's silence that we receive, but it's very limited advice that they can give us, because at the present time, we seem to be significantly challenged. The issue of multiple POSs and where we stand as an end operator in the value chain of certification, and whether we can surrender POSs when we're not part of that chain and not certified, and we have no wish to be certified in that regard, becomes an item. For example, does the bunker vessel operator have to be certified to be able to carry POSs? We get very different views from the fuel suppliers at the moment. So really just not so much a question, more an observation. It really is something that is essential for us to get cleared up as soon as possible, because this is starting very, very soon. And it's going to be very difficult to go backwards to try and get these necessary documentation once we've started the process. So I would encourage, please get out as much guidance as you can, particularly to the verifiers, so that we can have a uniform approach. Thank you very much. I could go on for hours, but I won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are, of course, you know very well how we need to run in parallel the development of the framework with the development of the tools, with the interpretation, the implementation, the enforcement. So it's not a very natural sequence of events that is happening right now. And we try to do our best, and we are also learning by doing, like you are doing. So we are all on the same boat. Do you want to add anything, José?
Thank you, Manuel. Just a quick comment. For the ones who's following the SSF SAPS Workstream 2, the discussions are going for several months. So the work is being done. The solution, it is complex, because under the right side, there is also ongoing, and implementation is happening at this time. So we are not building upon something that is already established. We are building upon something that is being developed. We have the draft, or Commission has and the ESSF working group has the first draft, and the ESSF SAPS Workstream 2 hopes to deliver the report as soon as possible. And I think that everyone that has participated in group knows that we are working hard, and everybody who is participating in that is working hard to deliver as fast as they can, and to have a simplified approach that will serve the purpose. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you. Please, Ireland.
So thank you, and thank you for the comment from Carnival there. So we know that you inherited this as well, and we think you've done an absolutely great job at EMSA to get this work progressing along. But the regulation has been adopted and the penalties are in place, and that's sort of the issue. So learning as we go is not the right way to do this. And unfortunately, it's what we've got, and we can't do a hell of a lot about it at the moment. But I would hope in the future that that's not the process that the Commission uses. And as Member States, obviously, we're going to be quite proactive in trying to address that in the future. So there is a lot of feedback coming from our flag state companies and the shipping industry. And there's a lot of issues around that, and there's no denying it. And that said, we do accept that EMSA has done a wonderful job in trying to address what they've inherited.
Thank you. And we will continue to do our best. And you know you can count on us. You can address us for any doubts that you have. You can address us and the Commission for all the legal implications of this implementation that is challenging but also promising, I would say, at the same time. So we are living very interesting times altogether. I stop here. We have questions in the chat. You will get your replies 100%. Okay, so we move to the last presentation where we will give you an update of what is happening in-house that have also an impact and an implication on all of you as our stakeholders. And we have with us, of course, the department that is in charge for all the IT developments. And we have Carolina Brodacka, who will present this overview of what we are doing in terms of implementation. Thank you.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I will try to do it very shortly, the presentation. So, as the Maritime Digital Solutions, as you know, EMSA supports all the member states, the stakeholders, to implement the fuel database. So, the content of my presentation will be the FuelEU database, the current status of implementation, EMSA support, and the challenges and next steps. Quick overview, some of you know the TETIS MRV system, so we try to use a tool that EMSA already had under the scope of MRV ETS. We have a common branch of data under the ship tabs, so we wanted to use, and a little bit with the principle of not to decrease as much as possible the burden and follow the unique reporting principle, that this system would allow to use the information that is already reported and used under the legal framework of the fuel maritime regulation. So a little bit an overview of the site map. So we have some enhancements in 2025 on the yellow side for the MRV ETS. But what I wanted to stress here is the modules that will have to be developed on the next years under the FuelEU EU regulation. So we did some deployments for the fuel monitoring plan this year. Next year, early next year, we will have the first fuel report, partial fuel reports to be done on the TETIS MRV, the fuel verification report. Then we will jump to a more demanding module that will be the My Compliance Balance, as you saw by the presentation of my colleagues. It's a lot of information and a lot of users that will be using the system. Also, just to tell you some announcement that you will start to see in the TETIS MRV. So you will be able to frame the view by legal scope, FuelEU or MRV ETS. Also, when you open the ship page, you will be able to see that you can choose between MRV monitoring plan or fuel monitoring plan, and then MRV emission report and the fuel report. You will be able to create those documents. You will be able to also add and remove ships under the legal scope. So every time you add a new legal scope, you add a ship under that legal scope. Then you will be able to see per column the status of your different monitoring plans, if you're a company with different ships, the verifiers, which verifier are under the legal scope, and the companies. So this is the idea, to have a system that you can have a lot of information, the information that you need, and an overview of what's in the system. Also, as the current status of implementation from our side, EMSA, we can see that the MRV system, TETIS MRV system, has been growing in terms of companies under both scopes, but just because the subject is about the fuel regulation, we already have more than 1,500 companies. ISM companies, as you know, under the scope of this regulation. Then more than 14,000 ships under the fuel scope. And at the moment, we have verifiers with the pending status because we are depending on the delegated act. This morning, Peter said that it's going further for the NABs, to national accreditation bodies, to accept and accredit the verifiers under the fuel scope. Also, just an overview of the status, just to tell you that since we launched the first tools for the TETIS MRV system under the fuel scope, the fuel database, we have had an increasing of registered ships and also monitoring plans that were created. I did here I differentiated between the monitoring plans that were created and the monitoring plans that were submitted. And as you can see, August was very busy. Also to tell you that it's worth to have a common branch. We implemented a tool of cloning monitoring plans, and that had give us very good results because more than 80% of the monitoring plans were cloned and used for creating the fuel monitoring plans. As EMSA supports the member states, the stakeholders, and we have a bunch of tools like support pages, frequently asked questions. We also have 2 emails, help desk support. One is more relied to the TETIS MRV system, so technical issues, and the other more with related to regulatory doubts in the regulatory framework. So as you can see, there was a peak. This is for all issues of the TETIS MRV. We had some issues in February, March, due a lot with the attribution of administering authorities for the MRV ETS, and then another peak in August for the reasons I already mentioned about the new fuel monitoring plan. Also to tell you that we've been monitoring all the help desk, the tickets. So again, help desk for the MRV system, also the tickets that had to do a lot with the compliance of the regulation, namely pooling rules, allocation of fuel. So questions that were sent to the Fit for 55 help desk. And EMSA also supports with webinars. We've been doing webinars since June. Tomorrow we'll have the 3rd webinar on promotion and explanation of all that is happening on the fuel implementation of the FuelEU regulation. We have the frequently asked questions, both from side of the DJ Move and also from EMSA. And we also have tutorials. We've been releasing some tutorials since August about how to add ships and to the fleet under the fuel scope, assigning a fuel verifier, or even the workflow of the fuel monitoring plans. So the big challenges and next steps for the system will be the timeline of implementation. It is very, very demanding. My colleagues already show you the timetable. So yes, we'll have to do a lot of work until for the next months and years. We are focused on ensuring that functionalities are available when they are needed. So we will try to track all the timeline that we need to assure for the users. The compliance balance and flexibility mechanism will be especially challenging due to the needed communication between several companies. Anticipate new functionalities. So we already have prepared to launch all the tabs that had to do with OPS, substitute sources of energy, the wind factor. So we have been working on those requirements and developing those tools and functionalities in the TETIS MRV system. The FuelEU Maritime is a challenging and innovative piece of legislation that will need to be followed and constantly updated, like José just said, and we are aware of that, and we are expected to improve and to upload more tutorials to help the users and the stakeholders in our system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline, for this quick but extensive overview. Also, the feedback about the interest that there is by the end users in activating already the different functionalities. In a way, since ETS came 1 year before FuelEU Maritime, you know that as EMSA we consider this as an ecosystem. We are already exporting lessons that we have learned in the first year of implementation of ETS to FuelEU Maritime. And that is also a bit the logic that was behind the decision by the European Commission to task EMSA with the support to the implementation of both pieces of legislation in the interest also of the competent authorities and of the industry. I would now, if you have any questions, please share with us at the end of the workshop. I have really no time to take more questions now, but I would like to give the floor to our executive director for some closing remarks. She's been updated by us about what has happened during this very, I would say, dense of information workshop. And so she can really provide you with some feedback from our highest level. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuela. Well, dear colleagues, it looks like I'm stealing a part of your time from your eager to pose additional questions, but I promise on the behalf of my colleagues and team that we will sincerely reply to any question you may have and contact us. I'm sorry that I couldn't stay with you during the entire workshop, but I was closely following it according to my agenda. And I have heard that it was indeed a very active exchange, which on one hand side proved that the presentation that has been prepared were stimulative, but at the end of the day, it was this active exchange that makes this workshop successful. And I believe that, and I hope that you will leave this place by the feeling that it was indeed the added value event. When it comes to FuelEU Maritime and today's topic, we are approaching the critical moment when the full implementation should start. So we are encouraging you that you contact us if there is any still open question, or if there is anything that needs to be further clarified, either through help desk or to the library of our webinars or to the frequently asked questions. As you may heard, tomorrow we are starting with another webinar. And if any of your administrations or organization requires additional webinars, we can accommodate that. Just approach us and we will deliver. Equally so, if you find the tools, in any case, the whole point of the tools considered as the ecosystem was that it is user-friendly. So if you or your verifiers find that in some elements it's not yet reached that objective, that is also the feedback we want to understand and hear so that we can constantly improve it. When it comes to yesterday's part of the workshop and the feeling of the knowledge gaps, you were talking about probably one of the most controversial parts when it comes to alternative fuels, and that's the nuclear power. And as you have seen, there are lots of uncertainties and now unknown, not only when it comes to nuclear, but when it comes to safety of different alternatives in general. So we will continue with our series of studies together with our partners, and next year we will concentrate on the carbon capture and the storage, which also attracts a lot of interest and have the potential to serve the industry in the forthcoming years. We will finalize the studies that has been presented. The first stage has been presented yesterday, so hydrogen and ammonia, and then we will concentrate on what has been identified as the safety risk already, and it is related to the transport of the alternatively fueled vehicles on board the RoRo vessels. So the battery-propelled cars on the RoRo vessels and the fire risk that has been identified. Based on the guidelines that has been already developed, now we will try to enter more into the practical side and see what can be done both on the side of prevention and on the side of the response to this strong risk. So altogether, there is a lot of things still ahead of us, and I really appreciate this sense of cooperation between administrations, industry, academia, because indeed, for such a complex topics which we are discussing, the cooperation is the essential principle and a word. And with that in mind, I thanks once again my team, who really put a lot of efforts in organizing this event, and we hope to see you next year again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, for these closing remarks, also that are forward-looking. We never stop. We can't stop. Shipping never stops, so we also never stop. And just a final remark, presentations will be made available to register the participants. As usual, you will get the full array. So again, a lot of information to digest. And I would like to close this workshop just to tell you, save the date, save 4th of February in your calendars. We are going to have the launch of our second European Maritime Environmental Transport report that we have produced together with the European Environment Agency. It's going to be a big event that will look again to greener shipping, data information, data and analysis in support of this journey that we all share. Ambitious challenges, but also a big opportunity. Thank you to all, and see you on different occasions somewhere in Europe or the world. Thanks. Bye. May I ask you